Hello and welcome to our accounting equation number puzzle 1. In this practice exercise, we're going to be looking at the accounting equation itself for three completely unrelated firms. And what I mean by that is that in these firms, a particular amount for one firm has zero to do with the next two firms. So they're completely unrelated. We're working within one firm at a time, and then we'll move over and work in the next firm. So you may recall that the accounting equation gives us assets equals liabilities plus equity. In this particular problem, they have assets, they have liabilities. Now notice 1231 is the ending balance. But then for equity, they don't just give us one nice total of equity. They give us all the components of equity, which would include capital, paid-in capital, and retained earnings. But for retained earnings, they don't necessarily give you the ending retained earnings. They give you the components of retained earnings. Beginning retained earnings plus net income minus dividends gives you ending retained earnings. Now remember, dividends are generally going to be a negative number because they're being subtracted out of retained earnings. So again, keep in mind every firm is independent. So we're going to take a look at this and try to figure out what are some of the missing pieces for this equation. So with this one, firm 1, we know assets, we know liabilities. Therefore, if you want to do this on the side, we know that equity has to be the difference between those two. There has to be $390,000 in equity. Now, we're looking for two different numbers here. So the easiest one to get would probably be beginning retained earnings. Basically, beginning plus net income minus dividends would equal ending retained earnings. So anytime you're needing to back into a number, in other words, you know the ending number and you're missing one of the components before that, the easiest way to formulate that equation is to grab the ending number and reverse or subtract the other two numbers. Now, I do want to mention that'll only work if dividends were already entered as a negative because they have a negative impact. So by reversing that, we're essentially adding the number back in. So again, these were already entered as negative. So that's why I need to actually do a negative for both cells, reversing both of them. Now, reversing a negative turns it into a positive, of course, but that's the way you need to do it. If these were given to you just as absolute values, positive numbers, even though we know they're going to be subtracted, you have to factor that in your equation as well. In the end, once you have the number you think is correct, before you enter it and store it in your software, submit it, I would say work it forward. Take the number you think is the beginning retained earnings plus net income minus dividends, and it had better equal the ending retained earnings, which it does in this situation. So now we really didn't need that number to get ending paid-in capital, but we do need the number period for the problem. Ending paid-in capital, we know that total equity had to be $393,000. We already knew what ending retained earnings was. So really, in this case, we're just taking $393,000 minus the $310,000. That has to be $83,000 there. That's all we're doing in this situation. So we have that number, and firm 1 is taken care of. Again, we didn't really need equity on the side, total equity, but I just put it in there so we could see the problem, see how it was worked. So with firm number 2, we're missing net income and we're missing ending retained earnings. Now, we know that total assets plus total liabilities must equal total equity, but again, we don't really have a total equity line. We're going to put one down here, just like we did before. So total assets minus total liabilities. We know that equity has to be $191,000. Now, in this case, we knew paid-in capital, but we didn't know ending retained earnings. So it's kind of the reverse of what we were doing earlier. So again, ending retained earnings must be the $191,000 equity minus this $82,000 paid in capital. Those are the two components of equity. So ending retained earnings must be $109,000. Now that we know ending retained earnings, we can back into net income. And really it's the same basic approach we took to get beginning retained earnings. We're grabbing this ending retained earnings, and again, we're reversing the other two pieces we do know. So subtract this negative, which ends up adding the amount in, subtract beginning retained earnings, and we know that net income must have been $71,000. Again, whenever you get one of those problems where you have to reverse something, it's always a good idea, just to make sure you're on the right path, to double check your work and add it forward. 80 plus 71 minus 42, sure enough, that gives us 109,000. So the good news is firm 3 is actually the easier of the problems. We're missing total liabilities, but we are also missing ending retained earnings. The good news is we have everything in retained earnings to calculate ending retained earnings straightforward. We don't need to reverse into a problem or back into a problem. We're just going forward. Beginning plus net income. Now we're already subtracting this number. We already have a minus in there. So I'm saying plus a minus. Basically, you want to make sure that $72,000 gets subtracted however you look at it. The ending balance has to be $91,000. And again, if I grab these three cells, sure enough, it's $91,000. Always double check that to make sure you didn't get something reversed the wrong way. Now we have assets. We have our two components of equity, paid in capital and ending retained earnings. We're missing liabilities. Liabilities has to be assets minus equity, which in this case is minus $24,000 and also minus $91,000. Liabilities must be $187,000. So if you're in doubt with that one, add liabilities plus the two components of equity, and sure enough, that's $302,000, which is our assets. So hopefully this has helped to clarify how to work this version of the accounting equation number puzzle. And again, we have a couple of versions of this type of problem you might see. So I have a couple of videos for this. Hopefully this has helped to clarify this topic, but please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to working with you in our next video.